Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of FireDEV, a fireside chat with people in the industry. Today, my guest is Alex Delamaire. Alex, how are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me on the show.
I mean, it's great to have you on. So you work over Blackbird Interactive. I mean, you've had a pretty interesting career overall, which we'll touch on. But right now you're at Blackbird, and you just launched a sequel to one of my favorite game franchises of all time. One, especially PC gamers will know and love. Especially, I find if they know this game, I'll let you introduce the game in a second. But if they know this game franchise, I feel like they're more hardcore gamers, and I consider them more of a true PC master race gamer. So, do you want to introduce the game that you've been working on?
For sure, yeah. So Blackbird has recently launched a sequel to Homeworld, so it's Homeworld 3. Prior to that, the studio had done like a prequel, Deaths of Karak, but this is like the continuation of the story from 20 years ago. So yeah, the work is far from finished on it. There's a lot of post-launch fixes and improvements that we want to bring to the game. But it's kind of been almost 20 years in the making because some of the gameplay at the core of Homeworld 3 and the sort of the fact that space isn't empty anymore. There's like asteroids and megaliths and things for you to navigate your units around. It's something the team wanted to do 20 years ago, but the technology at the time just wouldn't allow them to do that really.
Of course, now technology advances so much, and that's one of the beauties of doing a game or even a movie a decade, two, three, four decades later is the technology advances so much. You see in movies all the time where they'll have like a sequel when Star Wars case a prequel, like many years later, and then you see it with video games as well. And it's always what's interesting. It's always a balancing act of keeping the old and classic, but that might not be, especially gameplay wise and mechanics, but they may no longer be the standards anymore. Like, a lot doesn't change in 2 years, but a lot will change in 20 years. What was cool and interesting then might just be mundane and, boring now. So, actually, before we even get out to that, do you want to talk a little bit about, what your role was, as part of Blackbird? Because you've been there for a few years as well.
Yeah, I've been at Blackbird for coming up on 4 years now, and so I'm the director of business development and communications. So my role is a little bit more behind the scenes, where I help us find partners either for full games that can be original IPs like Heartspace Shipbreaker, or someone else's IP. I mean, actually, Homeworld, we don't own it. We have some of the original creators of the game at the studio, but the IP was acquired 10 years ago when THQ went down. It was acquired by Gearbox. Um, so so we have done work like that also with Mojang on Minecraft Legends. And so yeah, my role is to basically find those opportunities for us, help put pitches together with the teams, keep relationships alive, so we have opportunities coming. And then once we've signed a game, I work with our publishing partners on supporting them on the marketing and communications campaign. Here again, we definitely have some input, and we've worked with some great partners overall. But because we're not the ones publishing the game, and we're strictly speaking we're not the ones with the marketing budget either. It's more of a consultative work, really, and kind of liaison as well, helping our publishing partner get the assets that they need, get uh, the right people in front of the camera, all that stuff. So all this to say that on Homeworld 3, my role was a bit more kind of distant. I was keeping an eye and helping with some of the communications and marketing strategy, but most of it was driven by the great team on the marketing side at Gearbox. Andrew McCree, Nathaniel Wadenmaker, Will. I mean, all those folks, yeah, are really the ones who have architected the marketing strategy and the release for the game.
Okay, so how do you connect with these potential partners? Is it a matter of you literally just going, or you guys going on LinkedIn and just connecting with people that work at that particular company, let's say like Mojang with Minecraft slash, Microsoft, or is it that, Blackbird has, obviously industry contacts, and then, the Blackbird is leveraging the contacts, and then they send you in to, communicate and figure out if there's any potential partnership that adds value to, both companies.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of that. Usually, like you have your own network to start with, and so you start from that, and then you also try to keep an eye on studios that are interesting in general, that seem to be looking to partner with other studios, or if not studios, IP owners, like I don't know, Wizards of the Coasts or others, and then yeah, whether through your own network or LinkedIn or other things, you try to find the right contact. That's also where industry shows like GDC, Gamescom, all the others are pretty helpful because well, first now there's a great tool that didn't exist actually before the pandemic called Meet to Match, where a lot of people register onto that, and it's kind of like yeah, it's an online matchmaking tool to meet business partners. So for me, it actually really helped me, especially when I started Blackbird. It was still the pandemic, so it was the only thing you could really use. So lots of people, lots more, I would say, than nowadays were on there, and so you could just find them and send them a message and have a quick intro. Um, and so that's kind of like the structured thing, and then you have some stuff that isn't structured, and why there's still value in going to shows and meeting in person is you'll go there and then you'll meet someone and they'll be like, oh, by the way, I know this person and you should talk to them because they might have work that's relevant to you, and they probably would be interested in having you pitch on it. And it's kind of like serendipitous encounters that you don't get if your interaction are boxed in a 20 to 30-minute call, where things can't really bleed over as much. Whereas when you're stuck in San Francisco or in Cologne for a week and you're all constantly bumping into each other, you have that kind of bubbling up energy and those opportunities that come up. Yeah, so that's kind of how it happens. And sometimes also people come to us, like it's more often than not, it's us kind of like putting a foot in the door, but we also have sometimes people who approach us.
So that platform that you just mentioned, Meet to Match, is a platform that I've never heard of. Like, well, how does someone join? Can they literally go on and join it like it's Facebook and LinkedIn, or is it invite only, or do you have to have some sort of in the industry? Because I'm interested in a platform like that as well. Obviously, I use LinkedIn to connect with yourself and many other great people in the industry to get them on FireDEV. But I feel like something like that, especially LinkedIn is becoming more and more like a traditional social network. But I feel like something like Meet to Match sounds even more niche than LinkedIn. So, how does someone join it?
Yeah, so Meet to Match is not really a permanent network. It's like semi-permanent in the sense that it's really a platform that's tied to events, and so it allows you to basically manage your digital calendar around those events. Um, so what they do is they like eventually you go on there, create a profile for the platform, but you can't really do much until there's an event you're interested in, and then if you want to basically use Meet to Match for that event, you pay a fee. I remember what it is, but I mean, I think depending on the event, it's somewhere between $50 to $80.
Okay.
And then that's it. It gives you access to the directory of people who are using Meet to Match for that event. So the funny bit is, like, for GDC, they're not an official partner, as opposed, I think, to Gamescom or other things. So the event on Meet to Match is called Meet to Match San Francisco at that time, but conveniently falls on the exact same dates as GDC, and then yeah, you can use your calendar there. When they're officially partnered with events, what it does is, well, it gives it a bit more visibility, obviously. So you have a bit more people registering on the platform, so you might find a couple more folks there. But also, what it does is, when they're officially partnered, you can choose, I believe, um, a specific meeting area because they're able to use the official meeting space for biz dev from, like, let's say, yeah, the Kölner Messe or other areas. So yeah, it's TLDR pretty easy. Just when an event you're interested comes up, go on the Meet to Match website and check if they're running something around that time, and then create the profile and start exploring.
Okay, I mean that's definitely something I'm gonna, you know, check out. Just final question around this. So you say, like when an event comes up, you just pay the fee. Like, do you have to actually be going to the event? Have some sort of ticket to the event to authorize it, or is it just a matter of there's an event that comes up like GDC or Gamescom, you're interested in connecting with people that are at that event or like-minded people for that event, but you're not going to the event itself, so you can just do it at home without going to the event, without even having access to the event.
Yeah, technically you don't have to be at the event because the platform is all online. The only thing that you'll find, and I think more and more these days, now that we're a couple years post pandemic, or at least officially post pandemic, is the people will go to these events. Usually, most of them, go there to meet in person because there's still something with the face to face interaction and all that can't fully be replaced. So if you're asking them to meet online during that event, you might find that they have very few slots to be
Mm,
behind a computer at a desk because they'll be running around on the show floor. I mean,
yeah.
they might take a call on their phone or something um, briefly in between meetings, but yeah, you might find it just a tiny bit more challenging, not impossible. In any case, it's a good way to put a foot in the door and to establish contact with people you didn't even know existed, or you didn't know who was the right contact at that publisher or that studio, and then all of a sudden you found them. So there's there's very little to lose. I mean, the 50-80 bucks are very quickly worth it, in my opinion. It's a good platform to use. It's well designed, prop to Fedor, who created it, and the team there in the Netherlands. It's a really good, really convenient platform. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, Lux are definitely going to be using that. And like these partnerships that you undertake, how long does it take from start to finish? Not finishing in terms of the project finishing, but you, let's say, reaching out to someone and then you basically agreed that okay, we're gonna do some work together. Like what does that process, look like? Because I doubt it's a matter of you speaking to someone at Mojang and then you saying, we want to do this game for you or do this part of this game, and they're like, yeah, that's fine, start Monday. I'm sure there's a bit more, especially again, a follow-up question is the pressure of being true to the IP and the processes to maintain the quality level that IP is known for, and like the mechanics, because the last thing you want is somebody else to work on the game and either that part of the game or the entire game doesn't feel like that franchise anymore.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and especially when it's working, yeah, on established brand IP, someone else's, um, game. Yeah, there's a lot of vetting, and it takes time. In general, whenever you meet a potential, work partner, it takes quite a while for it to become like an actual and effectual business partnership. I mean, first people are busy, but also, yeah, you need to kind of like build trust. You're probably not the only person they're thinking of. So on average, I'd say that the people we've established new relationships with, and kept maintaining them over time, seeing them at events just for a brief catch up whenever we're both there. um, I'd say overall it take 8 to 12 months between the moment you have that first meeting with someone like you've never met before, and you're just talking each other through what you do and the strengths of your respective companies, and then the moment where actually they will present to you an RFP, like a request for proposal, and you bid on it or something else. Yeah, 8 to 12 months is kind of like what I've seen, which means that yeah, you need to get started early. You need to have kind of like staggered engagements and relationships, because it's not like you can spin up thing very quickly. Sometimes you might be lucky. There's always exceptions, but a lot of the time, yeah, those things um, take a little while.
So, as director of business development, how does someone become, not necessarily director, but get into business development and communications? Because let's say you want to be a programmer on a video game. There's literally courses called computer games programming. The path is a bit more clearer. Again, it's not 100% straightforward of just do game programming and then work at Blackbird and make games, but there's a bit more of a direct path. So with something like business development and communications, is there a degree specifically that helps you? Like, what's the sort of path, and what was your path as well to this sort of field?
Right. So yeah, no, there's no degree per se. There's also a couple of different, I'd say, profiles of BizDev person, or a couple of different way the role exists. So for instance, you have business development at big publishers and big corporations, and that can kind of like take two forms. Some of it is actually more even borderline external development, like production facing, finding studios to work with and all that. And so it just so happened that they often they don't call it necessarily XDev, they call it BizDev. Like you'll meet some BizDev people at Activision and or Microsoft that are actually very focused on studio partnership like this. And so for those, it can be helpful for those folks to have a bit of a production background in this case, but they don't necessarily do. Then, still at big corporation studios, publishers, you have biz dev that is really more about super kind of strategic deals, IP acquisitions, signing, deals about full games, not just like getting some codev work, like really really high level stuff. And so I'm thinking, for instance, of people who may be the biz dev at Take Two, and were involved in some of the discussions with acquiring some studios in the past. I mean, the Gearbox acquisition, they knew them already, so I don't know if they had a lot of legwork to do, but things like that. And so those folks, a lot of them actually have a law background. They come from like legal and intellectual property and other things. Especially if in the U.S., it's a very common um, like path I've found to the top business development folks at the big organization. They often tend to be ex-lawyers. Um, and
I've
then you have
noticed that. Like there's a few video game companies out there. Not the founder, but like CEO is a lawyer, or used to be a regular lawyer, and again, I would love to get your opinion on that as well. How that happens, and if they're suited to it, and if they are, why they are, because like it just doesn't seem to be the obvious choice on the surface of it.
yeah, no, I mean, definitely, like first contact, you're like, oh, this is a bit surprising. But here again, there's lawyers and lawyers, right? There's all kinds of specialization in law, and so a lot of those people tend to come from like entertainment law and intellectual property and all these things. Actually, Strauss Zelnick, who's leading Take Two, he's a former lawyer, and yeah, he comes from entertainment, and I'm trying to remember which media company he was working for before. But that's his background. At Bethesda, before they were eventually acquired by Microsoft, the two people leading the charge were Robert Altman and Ernest
He was a
Dell.
lawyer, yes.
Yeah,
Robert Altman was a, like, yeah, because they founded ZeniMax, didn't they? The
yeah, yeah.
parent company to all that, to everything. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's also where it connects in the sense that, like, so ZeniMax, the holding corporation for all the Bethesda studios and all that, was backed by private venture capital, and in some of the backers, if I'm not mistaken, there's I forgot the name of the investment vehicle, the fund, but there was a fund where you had Jerry Bruckheimer and Bono. And so that's where, well, yeah, when you've worked in entertainment, at the high levels circles of like Hollywood and traditional entertainment media, you have connections, and you can also have access and leverage capital. So that's where for CEOs especially, I think actually to me it makes a ton of sense. For biz dev, I also think it can make sense, especially when you're getting into, like, I don't know, let's say, the biz dev people from EA who got into a chat with Lucasfilm and Star Wars. I mean, in the end, a lot of what you're going to have to deal with is also how you structure the contract and royalties and all these things around this IP. So, um, yeah, it can make sense to have someone who's very clearly minded that way. So you have this kinds of profile, and then you have, I would say, more the 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 Swiss Army knife, or the more kind of intermediate level of biz dev, which is where I would put myself. I'm not I'm not a Take Two CEO level, or even biz dev at a big corporation. I'm doing biz dev for like a pretty big but still an independent studio, and so here you have to kind of know a little bit of everything. You're a jack of all trades and maybe master of none. Um, and so in this case, the profiles, at that in that environment, the one I'm in, they tend to be quite a bit more varied. And so you often have people who have been in kind of like production roles in the past, or project management, or marketing and communications, which is my case. Before I transitioned more squarely on focusing on biz dev, I was a brand and franchise manager for games for, I don't know, about a decade. And then before that, I was actually in advertising. So yeah, related again to marketing and branding.
Yeah, obviously, it's all very well in getting the word out there, communicating with, I guess, customers, and then also partners, and selling the product, and making it, recognizable. Yeah, because correct me if I'm wrong. Your first foray into a proper video game company, which we was just talking about, was Bethesda, wasn't it? In 2012 to 2014,
Yep,
is that
it
correct?
was
Yeah.
totally.
What did you do over at Bethesda, and also, what titles?
Yeah, so Bethesda in the late 2000, early 2010, they like at the time, physical distribution was still pretty big, especially for
Mm,
console games, and it's very difficult to do physical distribution without being physically present. Like you just need to know the local intermediaries, the local retail chains, and establish relationships and all that stuff, and understand the peculiarities of physical distribution in that market, like which varies a lot more regionally than digital distribution in terms of how it's done. So as Bethesda slash ZeniMax was growing and had ambitions, they realized that okay, they're very US centric, and obviously Europe was a big market, fragmented compared to the US, but pretty sizable. So they opened European offices, like physical offices with folks that would help with really a focus on sales and distribution, but also local marketing and helping adapt the marketing gospel that was coming from the HQ in Rockville, Maryland. And so I was lucky to, at the time I was in an advertising agency, and they won the media buying budget for the French office of Bethesda. And so I started working with those folks indirectly, because technically I was not really on the account at the agency, but then people also knew that I like games more so than liking games. They knew that I kind of understood the games market or the competitive environment, and I was keeping an eye on, yeah, how people are marketing games and all that stuff. So got involved on that account, and then eventually I was like, oh, okay, this is pretty cool. And at the time I was a little bit tired of advertising. I hadn't been there for that long, 3 or 4 years, but advertising can be pretty grueling, especially when you start, I think. And so I had questions. I wasn't sure I wanted to carry on. And yeah, all of a sudden there was this company there, and it turned out that they were looking for someone who could be product manager but do also a bit of community management. And I was like, okay, this is really cool, because on top of that, Bethesda has just acquired, some of my favorite studios. I mean, I've always loved the Bethesda Game Studios game. Like, I played, I don't know, maybe 500 hours of Daggerfall when I was a teenager. Waited for Morrowind like crazy. Actually started forums and all that with friends around that. Um, and so huge fan of the mainline Bethesda Game Studios game, but also I've always loved id Software games. All their shooters. It's really my jam. Arcane, same thing, French studio. Obviously I've been following them. Love, Arx Fatalis, Dark Messiah, and so I was super excited when basically there was the opportunity to come work for Bethesda. 'Cause I was like, wow, they're a publisher that's like rounding up all my favorite studios. They're independent, privately owned, not the public company. And so yeah, I started talking to them, and basically telling them that, well, I'd be interested in the role, and did a bunch of interviews, and I jumped ship from the agency to Bethesda.
Awesome. So yeah, yeah, it is definitely an interesting one as well because there seems to have been like a bit of a resurgence, for id Software with especially Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, and then the new Doom that's also coming out.
Right.
Like, yeah, because Doom 3 was very popular, and he had a lot of like cult following. But I feel like Doom 3 in 2004 when it came out didn't do for gaming and itself what Doom, I believe, in 1993 did, and also before that, Wolfenstein 3D didn't shake the industry. I mean, the issue for Doom 3 was it went ahead Half-Life 2 in 2004.
Hmm.
Far Cry, I think, was 2005 or 2004. Fear was
Yeah.
2005, I believe, as well. So, it's going against all these behemoths, like Half-Life established by that point, Fear, starting out, and Far Cry, also kind starting out as well as. So it was like he had things that were good about it, but overall just couldn't compete out again. I feel like against those three titans, but now it's just risen. With 2016 Eternal and the next one as well. So like, how's that been for you watching that? Because you're older than me, but I remember as a kid playing Doom, and as I got a little older, it was kind of like the retro, game, and it was the retro company as well. But now it's like, oh, it's been talked about as like the in studio.
Yeah, I mean, so Doom 3, I'll say that, I've so I played it at the time. I was, yeah, eagerly expecting it. And yeah, it was obviously, as you said, it was a little bit at odds with some of the shooters that come before. I mean, especially if you think of Far Cry, which was, bringing in some more open-endedness and all that stuff, and Doom is very claustrophobic. Um, and so, I mean, I know that commercially the game did really well.
Mhm.
At the time, it did really, really well. But yeah, it didn't have the kind of splash of like it reinvents the genre or something. But I also think that it's, the id Software games. I mean, sure, some of them have pioneered stuff. You can't be a pioneer forever. After a while, genres are established and all that. But the other thing that they have for them is a very elegant design. And I think Doom 3 really delivered on that, and it's elegant because also they know kind of like where to stop, and they know where to also basically make some hard decisions. And so Doom 3 at the time, I remember people, I mean, at least online, a significant portion of people were hating the flashlight and the fact that you had to switch between the flashlight
Switch
and
between. I thought that was a cool quirk, to the game. That it was like he added a bit of cool, realism to it. I feel like if that was in a game now, it would be a bit more loved now because you see a lot of quirkiness like that in games. So I feel like that might have been a bit too early. Not a bad feature, just too early.
Yeah, maybe, and also because the other games were splashy or something. But to me, it's actually it's one of the purest design decision you can think of. Because actually, I don't think it's necessarily very realistic. Because like you can hold a gun and a flashlight, or you can, as some of the mods that came out pretty soon after, you can duct tape a flashlight to something. So
Okay, you could
it
do that. Yes, you could
yeah.
duct tape. I feel like holding a gun, unless it's a handgun, if you're gonna try and hold a shotgun, it's probably not gonna work so well. Like
Maybe,
it would have to be a small gun, and the duct taping thing is like realistically you can do it in the real world, but games have their own in-universe limitations. Obviously, you can't go around just doing what you want to
yeah.
do. So, like what would have been good is if that was something that you found later on, or maybe in a hidden area, you found some duct tape and you were like, okay, I could put this on maybe just one of my guns to make it even more realistic. You can only have it on the shotgun,
Right.
like that sort of element to it. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, so you could have had a trade-off. I mean, that's an interesting idea, actually. But the what I thought at the time, the reason why I loved it is because it's a very clear design decision in terms of like psychological safety for the player. It's you have to make a trade-off. Is do you see the danger, or can you retaliate against the danger? But you can't do both.
Yeah,
So you're going to be in dark rooms where you're not going to see much. Sometimes when you shoot, the flash of your gun will illuminate the room a little bit, but that's it. But really, you're going to be at least able to react, but you don't. You have very imperfect visual information, or you have perfect visual information, but then you have to switch back to your weapon. And so I was like, wow, this is an amazing survival horror mechanic, and in effect, Doom 3 is a survival horror. And so that's what I found really interesting with the game is that the original Doom games, they were many things in one. They were kind of like third person Robotron, in insofar as what is important in Doom, it's not so much that you shoot, it's that you can move and you can move fast. There's a great design analysis from one of the Bioshock 2 level designers. I forgot his name, and it's called maneuverability as defense, and that's really what the original
yeah.
Dooms are. You are powerful because you can dance between the projectiles, you can get up close for the kill, and then you can move back away. So there's that, which is the DNA that they took and that became Doom 2016, Eternal, and I assume the next one. But there's also another part of the Doom DNA, which is it was freaking scary at the time. It was, a really
Very
scary
dark.
game.
Like you
It's
couldn't see anything.
Yeah, and so I mean, even the original Doom games, Doom 1 and 2, and so the other strand in Doom as a brand, as an IP, is that it's also a survival horror game. So when games evolve and start becoming, they start to go just narrower but deeper, you have a choice to make. And so to me, Doom 3 was an interesting interpretation of like, okay, we're gonna de-emphasize some of the thrill of fast-paced combat and maneuverabilities, defense, and all that stuff. Some of it is done there, but it's noticeably slower your movement. But we're gonna go all up on like the survival horror and fear, and I think the game has aged beautifully. Like I actually replay that game every 4 or 5 years. I did it last year. There's a bunch of great mod on ModDB to bring up the graphics to modern standards, like the Sick mod and a bunch of others, and I mean, the visual design, the visual language, the mood setting, and all that. It's just it's top notch. Like it really holds up, and it's a great linear survival horror that is not too heavy on story. Yeah, it's pretty great. The only thing that's a bit weird when you play it in retrospect is they give you a ton of ammo, and you're like, what? Like, you have way too much ammo. So that's something that if there is ever a remake or a remaster beyond the BFG games, that might be good to tweak. But yeah, I love Doom 3. Honestly, I think it's kind of like the black sheep in the family. But i- I mean, if you look at the new Dooms, they borrow a lot, especially for the UAC section, the base and corridors. They borrow a lot from the visual language that was developed there, the kind of like bioorganic futurism. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Like you said, it was a slower paced game. Doom 3 was. Going, and I think you just said it. Very. elegantly. You could dance effectively in Doom 1 and 2, and a bit in Wolfenstein as well, but especially Doom, and that's got removed, and you was very more slow paced. Again, more of an element of realism, and it was even darker, and the graphics obviously look significantly more realistic. So seeing something scary on the screen, it wasn't just in the old Dooms, it was more of a jump factor. Like
Yeah,
that's what would scare you. It wasn't really the monster looking scary. Whereas in Doom 3, it was like, oh, this is kind of looking like some sort of Walking Dead creature, where this just looks scary, even if I can see it from across the corridor and it's slowly coming at me. The jump factor isn't just, but then I have to put my flashlight away to get the gun out. I feel like that's might have been a design decision
yeah,
from id to have more ammo, because they're like, you're probably not going to be able to be as precise with the shooting because you have to put your flashlight away. I feel like that was probably a design decision, from them. But even with the newer Dooms, I feel like there's a fair bit of ammo that you have in the guns. Not like unlimited, but I feel like there's a few guns you can consistently always have top. Like it's not too difficult. But yeah,
yeah,
yeah, Doom 3. Again, great game, but it was like Far Cry, Fear, Half Life. They just knocked it out of the park.
yeah,
And like you were saying, they were a bit more. Half Far Cry obviously was very open world. Half Life was more outdoorsy, and with the physics gave you a lot of sort of not openness in the world, but openness in the gameplay of how to interact with a situation, especially with the gravity gun. So I feel like the industry was kind of going more open worldy back then. So that, combined with how good those games were, just was the nail in the coffin. But then you had Fear, which was like, okay, if you want that really scary close encounter combat, Fear's your game. Plus, you
yeah.
have like the level of physics that you have in Half Life and Far Cry, but you now have them in Fear, and it's kind of a new thing because there's also that. I feel like if Doom 3 came out but it had no games before it might have been a bit more love because there was no comparison. The comparison also hurt it, I believe.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, I mean, I love all those other games. I mean, especially Far Cry and Fear. Like Fear is also a game I replay, semi-religiously every 4 or 5 years, because there's no game to this point. Maybe actually Selaco, the indie game that's come out, and that is basically Fear on the JZ Doom engine. But yeah, Fear had some really good encounter design, and the space and the AI were really handcrafted so that they would kind of like do a pincer movement and you know kind of try to surprise you going through two different corridors at the same time. So yeah, it was cool. But I think at the time when I played Doom 3, I was like, okay, this is cool, but yeah, those other games, they've put the bar very high. But then when I play it 20 years later, here again, after just some visual upgrades to make it stand up, but I'm like, you know what, the pacing, the mood of this game, and all the stuff that is um a bit more intangible. You can't just list it as a back of box feature, like physics puzzle and squad AI and all that stuff. It's really high quality, and it's one of the strengths of its software throughout their games is that intangible side. They're really good at it, and then yeah, the gameplay is a little bit more restrained, but it works well enough. And in the new Doom, same thing. I really enjoy in the reboot how the gameplay is a kind of a well, there's a bit of a rock paper scissors element that they've emphasized with the weapon, which is also in the original Doom games in terms of like certain weapons are better with certain enemies or to do crowd control. So they've leaned heavily on that, and then they really force you into the maneuverability as defense, because if you go in for the glory kills, right, that's how you replenish ammo and armor and health. So they really incentivize you as a player to actually take risk, not hide behind a crate, go in and close for the kill, and you're rewarded with what you need to keep killing.
Yeah, it's it's a very yeah, for sure. Like with Doom Free, everything that was going on back then, it was it was a difficult time. I feel like for them to launch, and I feel like that if not for 2016, just put them down. Like after that, you had one or two Wolfenstein games which were okay until the newer batch of Wolfenstein games, which are a bit more like the new Doom games. And it
Right?
was like id Software, they're releasing something, okay, it's probably not going to be that good, and now it's like all eyes on them. Now people are like it's the holy grail. They're definitely going to make something amazing, and like with the new Doom, I'm super excited for that. And obviously, through all of this, a lot has changed. And one of the things you mentioned probably about 15, 20 minutes ago was the transition from physical to digital. When you was over at Bethesda back in 2012 to 2014, you were still very physical, based then. So, like, how have you seen the market transition from physical to digital? And you being in the industry, how have you seen that shift within companies' mindset? Is that
Yeah.
something like 'cause you've been in a lot of companies? Have you generally seen them be very excited for that transition, or has it been kind of a pushback?
No, I mean, I think generally, you know, companies are nearly universally excited by digital for a bunch of reasons. First, it's just higher margins. Your
Mm.
distribution cost is much lower, even with the 30% average a platform takes. It's you have no cost of physical goods. You have no transport cost. You don't have a wholesaler that then sells into a retail network and all that stuff. So you're cutting a lot of the
Prices
middleman
high. Like
there.
this is what really annoys me. I'll go on PlayStation Network or on Steam. It's less Steam, but I'll go on PlayStation Network or Xbox, and I'll look at a game. It might be $70 there, but then if I go to the store
Yeah.
or Amazon, it's like 45, $50, and there's resale value with my physical copy. I can lend it to someone as well, even though
Yep.
Microsoft tried to stop that about 10 years ago. But we'll get onto that in a second. So like that must, I mean, as being an insider in the industry, does that irk you, the wrong way that digital games are cheaper to distribute, on whole, generally speaking, but they're sometimes significantly more expensive?
Yeah, they are, and so I mean, but I completely get where you come from, and like as a player, I also feel like that sometimes, really, where I'm like, well, yeah, physical copy, I have it, I can't really lose the library, like I can lend it, I can resell it, and yeah, I can sometimes find it for cheaper. The reason I think why universally, though, people have moved to buying games digitally, predominantly, I mean, on PC it's like near universal. It's like 90% or more of sales are just pure digital. On consoles, I think we're at like this. It depends per region, but it's like between 60 to 80%, I'd say, depending on the market. And so the reason for it is because also um, to counteract for all those kind of little annoyances that you mentioned. Well, companies will discount more frequently and more heavily in digital, right? You will see. I mean, it's very rare that a game is not at a minus 50% or even 75% 6 months to a year after launch. And you won't see such deep discounts in retail. And the reason for that is because in retail as well, you can't control. I mean, technically, you can tell your retailer, okay, flash promotion on this game for 2 weeks, but it's always a bit more difficult to control it. And I mean, there's intermediaries, and like there's the system is a bit imperfect, whereas on digital it's kind of easy because like you push a button and then all the prices adjust, and then you push another button and all the prices readjust, so you can go for a shorter but deeper discount. And I think that's what has made people okay buying those games. Then also with the convenience that, well, then when you move from PS4 to PS5, oh, your whole digital library is there, and you can choose to download it, and it's there with you all the time. And so that helps. And Steam obviously has done a lot more to encourage people to buy games on Steam because, well, they provide stuff like Steam Remote Play, so you can play with your computer from another computer, cloud-wise. You can do Steam Remote Play with friends, where you can actually stream the game to a friend. So like for a four-player co-op game, you don't need to all be in the same room. So that's cool. They have the chat system. They have forums. They have for some games like the um, kind of virtual item economy. So they've built a whole thing around owning a digital game on Steam that, as a I think as a user, is decently compelling. Oh, and you can share your library with up to 6 or 7 people too, which, yeah, you can share your physical disk, but it's a physical disk. Someone needs to come to your house. And how many people do you share games with? Is it more than 6 or 7 on average? Probably not. On Steam, with the click of a button, you can do it, and then your friends have access to your entire library. So, yeah, there's some parts of it that I find a little bit annoying, but there's some parts of it where I'm like, well, yeah, I can also understand why we all, transition there, and then it doesn't hurt that then we're not, pressing CDs and creating wasteful packaging and all that stuff. We can save a little bit on that.
Oh yeah, but like sometimes we want that wasteful packaging. Like sometimes we want that on our shelf. You gotta remember the days of those big boxes from
Yeah.
PC games. Then you would have the CD case inside, the big manual inside. I've still got
Oh,
some of them at
totally.
my parents' house. And then obviously it went smaller to like the DVD, cases, and they went a bit smaller with the PS3 cases, which what they're at now. I mean, I'm surprised that they haven't, like with the physical copies, they haven't just gone to the CD cases. Like I'm surprised they haven't got just to that size.
Well, they sort of did, and I mean, I'm with you. I love big collector's edition, and to me, they're a separate thing, though. And so, it's like now they're actually often done. Even big publishers will partner with like company like I am 8-bit or some other like limited run games, and do physical editions that are limited for people who want them. And they're not that much more expensive than they used to be. So you can still have your cake and eat it too. But towards the end, of I'd say mass physical retail of games, that's what the DVD cases had become. Like they were very slim DVD cases, and so it was becoming a little bit ridiculous because you're like, well, we still have a case, but that case is shit. Like you're not gonna want to display that. It's just really a vehicle for the disc not to get crushed. So to me at that point, it's really made sense to abandon physical and then keep it for some limited collectors stuff. Like that's what Gearbox chose to do with Homeworld. Actually, there is no standard physical edition of Homeworld, I believe, but there were about 10,000 collectors edition that people could get their hands on. And so yeah, it's a beautiful packaging with a miniature replica of the mothership and tons of great stuff. And so, yeah, if you care about physical, it was there for you to order. But if you don't care that much about that, then you get the no frill stuff, and it's just about the game. And yeah, in the end, I don't think it's necessarily that bad. The one thing that does still crawls its way in the back of my mind is um, I mean, people will say, oh, games are still as expensive even though costs have gone down. Well, it's true in distribution cost, but the cost of making games has grown exponentially. So they just see one side of the coin. So that's why I'm like, okay, I can understand why the prices have kind of like stayed the same, why you haven't passed on the savings to people, because other things have become very costly, and actually we're
Games
seeing
are
it.
expensive. Like
Yeah.
if you don't have it, probably 1 to 200 mil, forget about AAA. Like forget
Oh yeah.
about,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's at the minimum, man. Like you realistically to be competing with Destiny, Halo, GTA, you're looking at 500 mil to a billion. Like that to put that into perspective, that's like multiple Star Wars movies, not one, multiple, big tier Marvel movie budgets just for a game like GTA. Yeah, not everyone's competing with GTA, but back in the days, like in PS2, you would get something like a Getaway. Do you
Yeah.
remember Getaway?
Yeah. Yeah.
One,
The
yeah,
set in London. Yeah.
London, yeah, obviously very recognizable, to me. You would get something like that. Again, I don't know the budget, but I doubt it was on GTA level. You would get something like that, and like True Crime, and there's a few others as well back then. It was very popular. that format was that GTA popularized, and they wouldn't be like as good, but they were close. Like they were a good fun alternative. You're not getting that now. Like it's like good luck. Like forget that.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the production costs have gone up because visual fidelity is definitely a thing that is expensive,
Mm.
um, and other stuff.
Networking as well, the multiplayer side as well is expensive to
Yeah,
maintain and to build up.
totally. So yeah, in the end, that's why I'm like, the fact that the cost of games, although going digital, hasn't gone down. I think there's actually, there's a case for why that is. It's not that infuriating to me. Maybe it was when I understood less of the business, but now I it's fine. The part that still though crawls its way back into my head is in terms of like, yeah, digital rights management, and what happened to these libraries, if one day PlayStation goes down, what happens to
Yeah.
my digital games, and how can I keep playing this? But that's, I mean, unfortunately, that's a problem that we have to wrestle with a lot of things now. It's true with your phone. It's true with stuff like movies you might own, and
Stuff that's only on streaming services and they never do a physical release. Like
yeah.
outside of piracy, there's no legal alternative to make sure that if let's say there's a lot of stuff that that's on Netflix made by Netflix that's not on any other platform that's not even a physical copy. If Netflix just shut down, I doubt they would go through the hassle of putting it onto physical for the fans. So it means there'll be a lot of movies and TV shows that just disappear outside of piracy.
Exactly. So ownership and like preservation is, it's something, to me it's a bigger discussion around the move to digital than value for money and whether the consumer gets a good deal. I think, people are getting much better deals, at least especially if you can be a little bit patient and look at sales. You're getting much better deals on games than ever, and there's so many more games. So, but yeah, I mean, when I was at Bethesda, all this was interesting because obviously, the studios they had came and had a strong history with physical editions. I mean, when I was working there, there was the release of the new Wolfenstein, the New Order, in one of the local kind of like giveaways that we did, like specific to the French market. We went and bought a 3DO, and then they had Wolfenstein on there. Sorry, no, it was 3DO was the manufacturing company. A Jaguar. You remember that console?
Yes,
And
yes.
so
I never had one, but yeah, I remember they
yeah.
gave it a good go.
So we bought one like from a retro store, and with a copy of like Wolfenstein 3D on it, and paired it with some goodies for the new Wolfenstein, and then yeah, we did, I think, like a Twitter competition at the time. But it was very interesting to me because it was this love for this physical artifact like the game cartridge and the console, in an
Yeah.
age where we're increasingly moving away from it, and with all this around an IP, a game that also is, was born into this world but is now existing into this other world. And I was like, oh yeah, it's an interesting point in time.
Yeah, it's there's been a lot of things. I think the thing is with like especially game prices, uh, even though games again I haven't looked at it. I know consoles are cheaper now than they was 20, 30 years ago if you factor in inflation. I haven't checked with game, but I feel like they probably just kept up with inflation. But there's also other titles or genre, types of games, free to play, indie, mobile, ad supported. So there's a lot of other games that come in at a cheaper price point or even free. When you got games like Fortnite, you can get a lot of value. I'm not a Fortnite player, and I've tried it. It's not for me, but you can. A lot of people sink a lot of time into those games, and they're
Yeah.
free. Obviously, you can pay for stuff in there, but I know people that never buy any in-app purchases and they would literally just play that as their piece of entertainment. You can, argue how sort of enriching is it for the soul, as sorts compared to let's say a good Uncharted. for example, or a good Call of Duty online game, like, back in the day with Black Ops and Modern Warfare, even some of the new ones as well. But there's a lot of availability if you don't want to spend that much money. And with the cross platform nature of things, you're less restricted. So a friend could be on Xbox, you could be on PC, or maybe even PlayStation, and you could play with them. So I feel like that aspect of it, at least for the consumer, has made it really, really interesting. And those platform, I mean, those types of games have come about just because, like what we was talking about, games are expensive to make. Not everyone can make a game that competes with GTA now, so they're like, okay, we have to maybe go mobile, we have to maybe go free to play as sort of like our niche, or we might have to go mobile, like I mean, more indie, sort of games. And yeah, you're seeing really exciting titles, from not because indie kind of initially was okay if you're not quite, I say, good enough, it's just you make an indie game. Now you're seeing experts of the industry doing indie titles because they're just really fun, sort of raw, creative, products that have just a lot of flexibility with them, and you can interact with the community as well in a less sort of PR way as well, and you can just kind of be free flowing. Combine that with streaming and YouTube and social media, you can definitely do games and interact with the fans in a way that, let's say, GTA with all of their money can't.
Yeah, no, totally. And like, I mean, indie today, I mean, it's not an indication of like anything but you're your own captain. But you have indie games that are whose successes are, as massive as AAA. Like, take something like Pal World, they made 500 million in a month or something. And so yeah, it's definitely a very interesting time. And I think, people have never been more spoiled for like games and the variety of games and how accessible games are. As you said, there's, free to play, and not every, I mean, sure, there's a lot of free to play that are like Skinner boxes, and they're really aggressively monetizing, but not all of them are. So I think, when you think of when video games emerged in, I don't know, the late 60s, and you had to be kind of like a wealthy rich kid, or be at university where they had computers and you could access that, or you had to put in your quarters at the arcade machines. Now it's really, very accessible and part of everyone's language. So I think, yeah, it's quite an unprecedented times. It's also what makes it kind of like sort of, I imagine, scary, because even if the industry right now is in a bit of a contraction. I mean, not necessarily revenue so much, but at least in terms of size of, how many people work in the industry. But even if it's in that space, it's still, a thriving space. It's a very diverse space. So I think the sort of like pandemonium box of games has been fully opened over the last 10, 15 years with, new distribution model like digital, but also new development model, and like kind of like customer relationship model like early access and direct and self-financing, and then you also mentioned free to play. So in the end, like, it's great because it opens the door for a lot more players, but also a lot more competition. And it also means that, there's not just one model now. There's like an infinity of models, and the challenge is finding the model that's right for the game you have in mind, and then connecting it to the right audience. And that can be pretty, daunting. You're kind of like staring into the abyss. But I don't know. All in all, I think it's maybe also a better problem to have than going back 25 years ago, where, well, if you couldn't strike a deal with a publisher who would put your box product, on retail shelves, doesn't matter whether you have a cool game idea or you're an amazing even programmer, you can make the game, no one will ever freaking see it. You know?
Yeah,
So,
and then you would, as a developer, small development firm, think, is it even worth us putting it out there? Because obviously the costs of putting it
yeah.
out there. Whereas now you can make a game with little money, on regular like you could just have a MacBook or like a Windows machine, regular sort of hardware. You don't need special, expensive dev kits as well. That was another issue, especially with consoles. And you could just now you can just put it on the App Store, put it out there, just see how it goes, or like Steam early access, or something along those lines. So you can really get stuff. And then hence why we have these all these indie titles, we have all these mobile games, because there's people out there that probably couldn't warrant getting it out or even have the financial means to get it out there 20 years ago. But now, because they've already got a MacBook, they've already got an iPhone, they just got to spend some time and make it. Especially now with other tools like AI coming out. They could even just be a coder and do some AI work, and with some basic skills themselves, do the artwork as well. So there's like the the barrier to entry for uh, making games has never been lower. But like you said, the competition has never been greater.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, I mean, it's the main for me, what's happening with the last 2 years in the games industry, and all the layoffs across the board from, I mean, big corporations for sure, and in that case sometimes there's a bit of maybe stock valuation chasing, not disregarding that, but there's been also um, reduction in force at many studios, or closure of many studios including independent. I mean, Blackbird's been hit too. And so I, I think all this, it's basically a sort of like slightly delayed consequence of what we just discussed, meaning that yeah, there's a lot of talented people who can make games out there, and there's a lot of competition for eyeballs, and good games can really come from anywhere. The games from um, areas of the world that are very different from the historical markets. So let's say the Western world, like Europe and the US and Japan. Well, now you see games from completely different regions, like Central Europe or Southeast Asia, finding massive success in those historical markets, and they're not coming from the historical studios. And so the challenge is, well, you had a historical industry in those established market that developed itself on having that audience that was a bit captive. Now that audience is curious, is has access easily to many games, some of which are not from developers from this part of the world, and then the other developers, because while they live in another region, well, their break even point can be pretty different too. So what is success for them is different from what is success for a historical studio. And so if the bar is lower, all of a sudden you can have also a lot more of these studios that need, a smaller amount of revenue, instead of like having, you can sustain just one competitor that needs a share of the pie that's as big as you. You can have 20 competitors who just need 1/20th of the share of your pie to exist. And so all of a sudden you're fighting, or you're in competition with these 20 folks. And so I think that's what's happening in the games industry right now. It's just it's not new. It's been slowly unfolding as digital distribution, as the barrier to yeah, retail has been going down, but now we're really starting to feel it, and it's really painful, and it sucks for the people who are in the historically established space, and like I include myself in it, and I include specifically a lot of people I know, and yeah, you don't quite know exactly when and how it's going to stabilize there, but at the same time it feels a little bit inevitable. And I'm also super glad that you have people that can make a living, because they're super talented of making games, and all of a sudden they, I don't know, they were like in Poland or Bulgaria or Romania, and they strike it big, or at least big for them, and that's awesome. All of a sudden that becomes a lifeline for them. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. With all of these, obviously, things we're talking about, all the different types of games, because you've worked on a variety of titles, obviously from Homeworld more recently. You said Minecraft Legends. Again, Legends isn't like a small indie game, but I feel like it's not in the same sort of, maybe not financial. Financial sort of scale is maybe not the right term, because I don't know. It might have been more expensive than Homeworld, possibly, especially with Minecraft's. I mean, Microsoft's budgets. But it feels more like an indie game, obviously, because it's Minecraft. So, what's been your experience on working on a variety of titles, and which ones do you prefer? Like, what's the differences and what's the similarities?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked so at Bethesda, yeah, I worked at like Wolfenstein, the New Order, Dishonored, The Evil Within, Elder Scrolls Online, a tiny bit of Fallout 4, and Doom 2016 before it really was public. And then I moved to Relic and worked more on strategy games like Company of Heroes, Age of Empires 4, um, then The Long Dark at Hinterland, and then finally, yeah, Blackbird, Minecraft Legends, Heartspace Shoebreaker, Homeworld, Crossfire Legion. Um, yeah, hopefully I'm not forgetting any title. Um, so yeah, pretty different titles. I mean, what I've found in my career is that obviously it is very different if you work on a live service game. Like and by live service I really mean, a game that has updates that are at least kind of like monthly with a big quarterly drop. So yeah, you mentioned, Destiny. I mean, Call of Duty. They've all moved to that model. I wouldn't necessarily include a game like the Paradox games as a game as a service. Like, I mean, it's, or at least when I think about it, like for sure they keep updating it, but the pace of it can be a bit different. And so live service, it's really interesting, comes with its own set of challenges, but I also find that you can feel a bit on a treadmill at some point. Like it really just never stops, and it's constantly live. And so I do like the space that some games have carved out, where yeah, they have free updates or free DLC, but it's not necessarily as frequent. And there's definitely a space for that. It works. Like the Long Dark that I worked on was like this, a big update every 6 months ish, 4 to 6 months, a bit more frequent now. Elden Ring to is kind of like that. Big DLC 2 years after the fact. Um, so that's something for me that is always kind of on my mind when I think of like games that I might work on, is like, okay, what is it leaning more towards? There's obviously how I feel personally about it, but then there's really what it means in terms of your strategy and your relationship with players. It's actually pretty different. Um, in terms of picking a favorite, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, Bethesda was an amazing start because it was a lot of the stuff I really naturally loved. So it was really cool to work on all those games, and then the people at Arcane in particular are amazing and super talented, and being French also help us obviously um, strike kind of a good relationship there with them. So I have fond memories of working on Dishonored. Um, like Company of Heroes, I'll always have fond memory of it. Like it was, I joined Relic towards the, I say, middle of the life cycle of Company of Heroes 2. So shipping the last expansion and doing the marketing campaign for it, and then after that figuring out how we can keep the game going with a fairly minimal skeleton crew and doing some small updates here and there. But yeah, it's a amazing franchise and some super talented and dedicated people. So it will always be it always have a special place in my heart. It's also what brought me to Canada. Long Dark is an amazing title. Like it's so cleverly designed, and yeah, I have a lot of respect for that team. And then Raf von Lierop, who founded the studio, who's the main creative force behind the game as well. Yeah, it's a really special game. It's a survival game that's not about a power fantasy. It's very rare. It's actually more of a vulnerability fantasy. And then of all the Blackbird titles, I'll just pick one. I'll pick Heartspace Shipbreaker because yeah, it was original IP, made at Blackbird, and um, like all the other titles that the studios worked on, they're great, and I quite like them. But Shipbreaker really felt special because it was entirely created in house by a team of first-time directors there who eventually found their way into this product after many years of being a skeleton team and kind of incubating it. And then it's such a unique game. um, I love how it has elements of an immersive sim, but very limited in kind of its scope, because it's also almost puzzle like. You're disassembling spaceships. I love kind of the retro cassette punk, as the team calls it, aesthetic. I also think the theme and the story are quite interesting, because ultimately it's about how we value work and respect work, especially manual labor. And also it's a tale about unionization at the end, and that just happened to coincide with when that movement in the game industry was gaining some traction. So yeah, Shipbreaker felt pretty special. Like I joined just as it was launching into early access, and so I also got to really see um, the full kind of like public development on it, and help the team here and there. So I always have fond memories of it, but yeah, it's in the end it's hard to choose, because you always develop some attachment for the stuff you worked on, even the stuff that doesn't work. Like, I don't know if it's Stockholm syndrome or something, but you spend so much time and energy that you cannot not care.
Yeah, of course. And you spoke about a very interesting part is like updates. Like, what's your opinion on updates? On obviously a bad thing, but obviously it being for improvement versus releasing titles and software as well. But I feel like games is definitely very prevalent, and there is releasing unbroken. There's constant day one patches, day zero patches all of the time. With most big titles nowadays. What's your opinion on on that as a gamer, and also being within the industry and probably seeing titles released where now or in the last 5-10 years, where 20 years ago they probably wouldn't have got released at that stage because it was final.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a bit of a mixed bag. There's increasingly more pressure in terms of like the frequency of people, how quickly they go through content, and you know if you belong to a big organization, the pressure to put something out as well, and then is that organization is publicly traded, then all of a sudden it coincides with forecast, and so all that is a factor that definitely is complicating things. I also think that we're looking at things through rose tinted glasses, because um, there were games that released in the past that were undercooked. It's just either people just thought that's was intentional game design, and maybe maybe really it wasn't. But there's also, like, I remember like Battle Cruiser 3080 or something. Anyway, kind of like the Star Citizen of its time, from Derek Smart, kind of a single developer, and so that's been that person's life work, and then lots of, I mean, I don't remember all the details, but very storied, road to market, very bumpy, and eventually found a publisher. And I remember buying the game in the box product; it was utterly unplayable. It just wasn't playable. Or there was, Myth 1 or 2 from Bungie, where if you changed the install directory and you uninstalled the game, it would erase your hard drive. Um, so there's been, I think, in the past a lot of games that were also had some issues. It's just there were fewer of them. The market was smaller. People would also, I mean, there was no internet to complain, and there wasn't really that mechanism through which you could give feedback to company, or even the sense of sometimes entitlement we feel, and sometimes rightful entitlement we feel as like consumers and people who pay money, and then we'll go and just tell people online, right? So you know I think it's the gap is not necessarily as big as we think it was. It's just the context has changed quite a bit. um, and people also move on from games more quickly because there's tons of options, right? I mean, I remember, buying games, and obviously I was a teenager at the time. I didn't have the same disposable income as I have now, but still, I was putting a lot of what I had into games, so evened out in a way. And yeah, I would buy this that one game, and I'd play a game for like 4 to 6 months on average. The time I remember being the most miserable is when I had extra money. I can't remember exactly why, and I ended up buying 2 games. It was Blood and Outlaws, which I both really loved. But then I was constantly bouncing from one to the other, and I was miserable at the time because I was like, oh, I can't focus, and whereas how I had played games before is I had learned to, well, yeah, appreciate what I have and try to make the most of it, and then eventually I would kind of like drop out. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not, I don't want to excuse everything. And definitely there's some games that release in a poor state, but I don't think it's necessarily novel. And I think we're also in the kind of environment where it's become more visible, and we are in a position where we can be less tolerant of it.
Yeah, it's like it's a great thing updates are. What they've been able to do either in new content or fixing problems, because it's not to say old games never had their problems, like they did, and they were fine, and some of those problems destroyed what could have been amazing titles and amazing franchises. Whereas now, something that might be broken either due to overpromise or just it just wasn't quite ready, it can be fixed
Yep.
and updated or new content added, and then it can become a really popular title. One that comes to mind, I think there was a lot of criticism on this title, unfair considering the size of the team. But No Man's Sky, when
Yeah.
it launched, they promised a little bit more than what they was, delivering. Again, I think they shouldn't have got the hate they did. The guys over there, because it was like 10 or 12 people or something like that for what they achieved. I think just looking at it from a technical perspective, it was amazing. But now, like the update, like they're free. You almost like gain a new game every single time they're releasing a major update every like a year or so, or every 6 months. And if that was back 20 years ago, that game would have been dead in the water. Like nobody would have cared because it wasn't what it needed to be on launch. But because they made it and beyond, and for free, whilst just charging old customers and adding VR support and all this other crazy stuff, it means it's become a game that actually people want to buy.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's definitely something there, like Final Fantasy 14, Rainbow Six Siege. I mean, there's a bunch of games like that that you can plot the trajectory that way. The important thing though is they were still at the core of it enough people interested and hooked, right? Because that's the thing. It's like even if they had a vocal audience that was a bit enraged and all that stuff, they needed supporters. They needed people who would stay there, and then they also needed people who were enraged but then had enough of an open mind so that they would come back to it, right? Because you also have games where like people, well, maybe they'll say they'll just move on, and then that's it. So yeah, as you said, patches have this thing where like they can give a second life to the game. I also think that what is interesting, it's not technically a patch, but it's just the framework and the cadence that's different in practice. You are updating and upgrading software as you go. I think that things like early access, are very interesting because what they allow you to do is not design a black box, and then sometimes you will realize that okay, I was very excited about this thing in the game, and I thought people would be, but actually the thing they're excited in the game the most about seems to be this other thing, and then you have a chance to maybe adjust and pivot. And when I was working at Hinterland, that's kind of like the story of the Long Dark, where they did a Kickstarter in, I don't know, 2012 or 2013, about this survival game that was going to be, I mean, yeah, single player, which it is, but mostly kind of like story driven. And then in 2014 they wanted to bring it to Steam, early access, and so obviously begs the question of what do you bring there when you're thinking of having a game that is a bit story driven, but you don't really have the story and all that stuff. And if it's meant even to be a little bit linear, do you deliver like a quarter of the linear stuff and then people, that's it, they wait for the other quarter, like episodic? So what the team settled on was basically building a sort of like sandbox, not test environment, but really, okay, here is a map that eventually we will populate with stories and stuff, but for now it's just you go and survive on this map and you interact with the core system, the windshield simulation, the foraging, and all that stuff. And then people really loved it, and the systems themselves were enough for people to have fun and tell their own story. You know, the systems were an excuse to interact in the world and find your own narrative and find your own reason for why you're in this world and you're trying to survive. And so what the Long Dark ended up doing through early access and then even 1.0 release is they've kind of shifted the focus. um like they're still, walking towards finishing the main story. There's an episodic story there. They still have to release one episode out of 5 10 years later, but they're close. But the reason why it took so long for the main story to be completed is because they acknowledged that people really love the unauthored story they could tell themselves by playing in the kind of sandbox free mode. And so they've actually redirected their effort to be weighed a bit more in favor of that. And so over the last decade, they've basically built a completely other game than what they had set out to do. They built this old sandbox mode with, I think now a dozen maps, systems that they keep adding that add to the entire experience. Like there are systems that, much like the Paradox games, they update the core of the game, and then all of a sudden it changes how you approach your entire playthrough. Um, and they've delivered extreme value because all this has been completely free, just sustained by additional incremental sales, No Man's Sky like of the base game. And so that would have never happened if they didn't do early access, because they would have gone much further, um, at a much further point in development before shipping out something to people. And by that point, they wouldn't have been able to kind of like pivot and change how they weighed their effort between the story mode and the sandbox mode, which again, sandbox was initially not really even a consideration. It came out of the need for early access. So I think this is pretty fascinating, and right now the Long Dark is the one that comes to me because I've worked on it, but I'm sure there's plenty of other games you can find that actually have a similar story. I mean, I know that the latest Subnautica Below Zero, they completely changed the narrative structure and narrative design and all that for similar reasons. And I think that's pretty great. It's ways of developing that were not really available, even like a decade or 15 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. It's good and bad changes obviously to the gaming industry, and you've been part of the industry for so many years. You've seen so many things happen, and there's obviously the side of from gamers, there's the side from distributors, developers, publishers, and like anything, whether it's digital or whether it's the over-the-air updates that we get now, or like updates literally within the game itself, not just a update that gets downloaded and kind of installed. The content, the free to play. Like you're gonna get a lot of bad examples, but then you'll get a lot of good examples of bad turn to good, and then obviously good turn to bad as well. So that's always the way. It's always I feel like the industry always stabilizes and finds a balance. Like and then something new comes out, a new way of doing things, and there's the good and the bad side to that as well. Yeah, and I feel like that's always the cycle. I feel like with updates, it's kind of figured a balance between day one and then versus having a broken game, and like gamers are more receptive, and I feel like reviewers as well, and big reviewers are more receptive to the BS that some studios do put out there, and not just saying, oh, because it's a big game, recognizable name, we're just going to keep giving them good reviews because we basically want, their marketing that gets
Yeah.
thrown at our way. And I feel like there's very big companies out there, like some of the big reviewers, and I'll mention someone like IGN, that I feel like they let certain big titles get away with what they shouldn't have, and I feel like it was because of the marketing that they was marketing dollars they were throwing at them around release time, and that's obviously a conflict of interest. If they're saying, promote Call of Duty, promote this, we're going to give you X amount of money, and then I'm like the way I imagine it going down is like they have that conversation, and then they're like, we're interested, we're looking forward to the review for our game. Like when you're paying them to promote your game on their website, like there's an incentive to not be too mean.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, there's a few egregious example over a decade ago where it might have been a case. I don't know if it's really that direct anymore. I mean, technically, if you're a good press organization, you keep the two sides separate. So, and that's true outside of games, right? Because like even traditional newspapers, printed newspapers, do finance part of their financing comes from advertising, and so the people in the sales department usually don't talk to the people in the editorial department unless it's like something that is um an kind of like an advertainment or something, and it's clearly labeled as such. So I, I don't know, but the thing that's true is that also IGN represents a specific audience, and so that's the thing is like there's a part of the gaming population that maybe has no interest for Call of Duty, or they think it's formulaic or whatever, and you know it can be true from a certain lens. There's another part of the population that also think it's probably perfectly fine if especially if they don't buy every release but buy every other release, and so yeah, it's it's kind of I don't know, it's kind of hard to gauge, I feel, in the end. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure it is, and it's always a difficult one, and I feel like a lot of time, a decent amount of time has to pass for things to settle down, and then to see what was the good, what was the bad in all of that. So as we're approaching the end, of the podcast for today, obviously I know we have some time constraints, Alex, and I'd love to get you on again. Before we do wrap up, what I always do is like a rapid fire fun round of questions. Are you ready for them?
Sure.
Yeah. So the first one is, if you was to run your own company, start your own company, or if you had a choice of being in a particular size company, what would you rather be part of? A 10-person, like a video game company, or a 1,000-person? Because you've been part of some big studios.
It's a tough one. Ultimately, for me, it also depends on the role you have in there. But I'd say, yeah, I mean, if you can be a 10-person studio with a game that has its audience well cornered and all that, that's pretty cool. I mean, in Vancouver, there's a few companies like that. There's one, they're probably a bit bigger. They're 14 or 20 people. And Night Games, they do The Forest and Sons of the Forest. They've sold millions and millions of copies of those survival games, and yeah, now they're just in for the fun, I imagine. So it's not a bad place to be if you can get there.
Oh yeah, for sure. And would you rather have 500,000 a year for the rest, US dollars a year for the rest of your life, or 5 million upfront one-off payment, and why?
Is that like in terms of like for doing things as financing for a game, or like personal
No,
money?
I mean, if that's what you want, but this is like the rapid fire fun round of questions is more life, philosophical, and personal. So
Okay.
just so you can do what you want. You can go and blow it at the casino.
Okay.
You can go and start a game studio. You can just live off it and chill. Like what you want to do. Like
Right.
what's your like? I love to ask these sort of questions to see, because the pod FireDEV in general is about advice for others and seeing people's journeys, but also people's mindset. Like some people choose 500,000, some people choose 5 mil, and like the reasons as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in the end, I think I'm more of the half a mil person. The reason for that is like, well, if I live long enough, 10 years, then I will make the 5 million anyway. And sure, if I have the 5 million now, I could do some investment and all that stuff. But I'm not. I mean, I money for me is buys security and peace of mind. The best thing money can buy for me is to not have to think about it. And there's actually studies that show that depending on countries, because obviously the cost of living are different, but there's a certain level of income past which the benefits to your peace of mind really decline because you're past the threshold of being comfortable. So yeah, I'd rather have 500,000 a year for the rest of my life, and then basically I know I don't really have to think about it. And sure, that means that I can't do crazy investing like I do with 5 million, but I don't care about that. I just want not to have to think about money. I don't care about making billions.
Mm. So, what's your favorite movie, favorite board game, and then ultimately favorite video game?
Okay, tough one. Favorite movie? I'd say maybe 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it's not like I would watch it all the time. It's not even like I watch it and I'm captivated 100% all the time, but it's such a beautifully constructed movie. And obviously there's no time to go into it now, but it's like built like a poem. There's a lot of like um, things that echo different parts of the movie. It's also incredibly well shot. If you look at the moon shots, they were shot a year or two before the moon landing, and they look incredibly believable. So yeah, favorite video game. Oh my god, this one's really tough. I mean, I'm sure everyone says that, but I'll still go for it. I'll go with the original Deus Ex maybe because it's such an interesting blend of different genres, especially at the time, that it just showed that to me. It showed me. It made me aware of what game design was, of how oh wow you can take that element and that other element, and then if you both bend them at a certain angle, they go well together. And I was like, oh cool, okay, this is how the sausage is made. It's how it made me realize that. And then I love the themes about cyberpunk and stuff. So yeah, so I'd say the first Deus Ex, and then favorite board game. It's tough because I have a confession to make. I'm not much of a board game person. I don't hate it, but I certainly don't have the board game culture that people have in the US or yeah, or even the UK. Like in France, board games were not as popular when I grew up. So yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one. I actually don't think I could give one because I don't play them that often.
Okay, that's not fair enough. And then video game that you're looking forward to. That can either be something that's not out yet or something you just haven't got around to playing.
Yeah, there's a bunch. There's one that I've been holding off on playing for a while. It's still in early access, and I just want to experience it straight in one go. It's a Gloomwood, a kind of a immersive sim, retro immersive sim, um, that um, is sometimes elevator pitch from New Blood. The publisher is like Thief with guns, Thief the Dark Project with guns.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so
I
it's
remember
it's
I loved Thief back in the day. Not the latest one on PS4, that was a bit weak, but like the older ones.
yeah, no, they're classic. And like there's a great fan campaign from one of the designers at Arcane Lyon actually that came out for Thief 1 called the Black Parade. I really encourage anyone who loves Thief to play it. It's a fantastic piece of work. And yeah, so Gloomwood, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. If I On balance, if I have to give more of a big AAA title, um I am mildly curious about the Star Wars Outlaws game, because yeah, there's very very few games that try to kind of do open world in space, or at least give you that feeling of exploration in space. Like I love Elite Dangerous, but it can be a bit grindy and grueling. I really like No Man's Sky, but same thing, the some of the grind parts and the
Yeah, it feels too much too RPG. And I feel like when you're adults, you don't just want to be grinding just for something, some basic part. You want to actually have that, like, you want Uncharted, but you want it open and you want it in space.
Yeah, and also I like a modicum of story or something that gives me an incentive to go out in the world. And then usually that's what I love about Bethesda games. They will hook you with a narrative premise. You do that for a couple hours, and then you just fuck off in the world and forget about the story for 200 hours. And but it's there if you need it, and it also supports the world. And in No Man's Sky, I had a little bit more of a difficult time with that. So it's a great game. It's just I know it's not entirely for me. So anyway, I love games that are about exploration, that have a little bit of story, and I love sci-fi and space. So I've been waiting eagerly for a game, especially a AAA game that managed to find the right balance there. And like Starfield had some really interesting stuff that they were doing. So people had a lot of criticism towards it, but on balance, I quite liked it. But still, there's areas where I would have loved to have a bit more in solar system exploration in Starfield when you're on your ship and the ability even to navigate from one planet to the other without just a cutscene, and stumble upon things old school, like in Freelancer, when you navigating in a star system. So I wonder if Star Wars Outlaws might do that. I wonder how they're gonna find that balance. I also imagine that they've tried to look at the crazy, ambitious plan that they another team at Ubisoft had for Beyond Good and Evil 2, and who knows where that is now. But I'm sure it was a
I feel
piece of
like
the
we've been waiting for that for ages.
yeah, exactly. So I know I imagine it was a piece of the conversation at Massive when they took that on because another team was kind of trying to do some of that. And so all in all, I'm really curious about Outlaws because I'm like, well, people here again, they're a bit argumentative as soon as the name Ubisoft gets thrown around, but I think there could be some good stuff there. And Massive is a super talented studio. Um, the yeah, the overall vibe of the game that I saw from the trailer got me curious. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll probably play it, when it comes out in August or a bit after because I'll be at Gamescom around that time. But yeah.
Okay, and final question, two-parter. Does money buy you happiness, and what does a good life mean to you?
Money buys you happiness? No, I don't think so. And for sure, it can make your life easier. As I said, for me, the best part of money is really if you can buy peace of mind and not have to think about it. So, and it's different for everyone, right? Because for instance, me, I don't really care too much about owning some things. Like for instance, I don't own a house right now, or an apartment or whatever, a home in Vancouver, where I am, it can be maybe a bit challenging because you don't always have as much renters protection as you have in other places I've lived. I mean, like in France. But if I were in France, I'd be absolutely comfortable growing old and not being an owner because I know I could still be safe in where I rent. So, you know, what is a comfortable level of money is different for everyone. It depends on your expectations and all that. But I think yeah, money can buy you that. It's important to check in with yourself and be like, okay, what are the things that really make me um, not necessarily happy, but give me sort of like peace of mind and stability. And then with where I am now, where I live in the world and professionally, what my path looks like, how am I looking on that path to get there? And then what does a good life look like? Um, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a silly answer I'll give, but for me, it's a life that you feel you lived fully. So like it's important to have a nest egg and prepare for retirement, but also well, if you save all your money for when you will be diminished and not really able to use it all, what's it good for? So there's a balance there, and also, you know, it's important to say no, definitely, and to preserve yourself. But sometimes you also want to I don't know, put yourself, I don't want to say in danger or challenge yourself or all those things that are a bit cliche, but yeah, you want to push yourself a little bit. And especially when it comes to meeting people, for me that's always been the really important thing is every time I've felt a bit drained, or I'm like, oh, I don't know if I feel like going out and meeting those people, especially if it's not work, if it's more of a social interaction. Every time I've managed to muster the energy to do that, and granted, I don't have like a crippling social anxiety or the things that people might be fighting for, but it's always kind of been worth it. Because yeah, I don't think we're a bit of a social animal, but also you always learn stuff from other people. It's very rare, like even someone that you have very few overlap, it's very rare that they have nothing to tell you, nothing to teach you. And even if you're bored in a certain setting, then you get to experience something differently. So yeah, for me, getting to meet people, spend time with people, keeping those connections alive, it is very important, and it is what makes things meaningful. And so here again, in terms of like spending money, whether it's traveling to see those people and friends, whether it's gift to them, I think it's a better investment that me buying the Apple Vision Pro or something. Yeah.
Great way to end the podcast, Alex. I just want to, thank you, Alex, for coming on today and obviously discussing your journey. I mean, we talked a lot about, many of the, industry stuff, and I really would like to get you back on to, talk more about specifically your journey and also, Homeworld as well, because, you was, very nice to, get me a key code for Steam as well. I've been playing the game, been enjoying it. So I'd love to get you on again, soon when your schedule permits it to talk more about the games that you literally worked on. But yeah, Alex, thank you for coming on,
Well, pleasure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I hope this was helpful to your listeners. And yeah, I'd be happy to be back.
and I want to thank everyone for tuning in into this week's episode of FireDEV. We've Alex Delamaire. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alex. And I'll see everyone in next week's episode. Take care. Bye.